I used FM 7-22, which was pretty new at the time, as like a foundational model. And it even mentions reverse cycle in FM 7-22. So that was like my gotcha to my battalion commander, which he didn't challenge me on it, but he's like, look, it's in doctrine. I can do this very quickly.
Team, welcome back to another week here on the Mops and Mo's podcast. Alex, thank you for joining us. In lieu of our normal banter, we have a little bit of a news update, an article coming out earlier this week that got some play, but not enough, I think, given the severity of what's actually happening. Alex, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Yeah, I've only seen this one on Politico and Federal News Network. Shout out to Rob Evans over at Hots and Cots for
Friend of the
making
show.
me aware of it. I don't think I would have seen it otherwise. I'll read Federal News's headline. It's DoD shifts billions from personnel and facilities accounts to fund the border mission. And just to put some like top line numbers on this, overall we're looking at like $1.4 billion being shifted. Which, like, what does that mean? Who really cares? I think to figure out why this is meaningful, we should look at where the money is getting cut from to go fund the border mission. The Army is moving $336 million from its permanent change of station funds used to pay for service members' moves. If you've been paying any attention to the state of PCS moves right now, we have tons of problems there. So cutting another $336 million, maybe not the move. The Army is also pulling $1 billion from its already underfunded Facilities Sustainment Restoration and Modernization account. That is the fund that pays for barracks, maintenance, updates, replacements, things like that. Navy is pulling $500,000 from its unemployment compensation fund. Marine Corps is pulling nearly $1 million from its incentives and special pay accounts. Again, Southern Border. Navy is cutting $20 million from facility repairs, so their lodging and housing stuff, as well as training facilities. Marine Corps is losing $20 million from training, education, and logistics programs, including JROTC. So we're going to cut funds for junior ROTC to pay for the border. And it just keeps on going down the line. You can look it up, either the Politico article or the Federal News Network article. They cover the same numbers. There are certainly others. There's some Air Force numbers. Analytics platforms getting cut, comms stuff getting cut, command and control stuff. So it's interesting, but I think why does this overlap with health and human performance stuff? It's that we're cutting it from things that pay for quality of life things for service members.
I think it's very, very, very easy for a conversation like this to get bogged down in politics and right versus left. And some people might love the fact that the border mission is something that's being funded the way that it is. But to your point, it is interesting and maybe alarming. I have always thought that it would be kind of cool to see a world where in the military's quote unquote off season, when we're not actively engaged in war overseas or what have you, we really turn around and invest a ton in quality of life, barracks upgrades, all these sorts of things. And it seems like, and I might get some heat for this, but it seems like we are also just good at creating conflicts that require heavy doses of funding that prevent us from investing in soldier quality of life. And that article that you mentioned is sort of a great example of that. Again, for better or for worse, depending on your political leanings. But what I will say is that down at the border, everybody knows it's quite hot. And when it comes to training for the heat, today's guest is probably one of the best. So, Alex, I'll turn it back over to you. And I'm going to pat myself on the back. That might be my best transition ever.
I will give it to you. I think that was the best banter to intro transition
Hot
this
political
podcast
topic
has
to
ever
hot
seen.
Training.
All right, let's do it. Our guest this week is Major Christian Wardynski. He is an instructor of economics in the Department of Social Sciences at the United States Military Academy at West Point, which he also graduated from in 2014. After completing Engineer Basic Officer Leader course, Chris served in the 54th Brigade Engineer Battalion in the 173rd Infantry Brigade out in Vicenza, Italy. He was a light equipment platoon leader, he was a sapper platoon leader, and he was a battalion air officer. More recently, he served as the company commander for Bravo Company 37th Engineer Battalion, 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. The conversation we're going to have today hinges largely around a specific exercise they participated in and how they trained up for it to handle the heat. as Drew alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
Chris holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics from West Point, a Master of Science in Engineering Management from Missouri University of Science and Technology, and a Master of Public Policy from the University of Chicago, where he also served as a fellow at the Pearson Institute. Chris and his wife Jackie have 4 daughters. Now, that would typically be the end of me reading off an intro for a guest, but in true economics instructor fashion, Christian sent an email to us, I think a couple days after recording. Maybe it was within a day. I'm not really sure. We're coming to this a few weeks later because we had to do some breaking news episodes on some nonsense going on in the Army. But he wanted to provide some clarifications and some background info that he wasn't able to get to in the actual conversation. So I'll knock these out. First one is very econ professor. In our episode, he said the DoD versus VA alignment thing is a principal agent problem. But as described, he says it would probably better fit the definition of a negative externality. The DoD's decision to overuse or under-rehabilitate soldiers imposes uncompensated long-term healthcare costs on the VA and thus the taxpayer. Similarly, the current commander not considering the cost savings of proper rehab and physical resiliency for soldiers for the next commander. Either way, both the principal agent issue and the externality issue apply. But like I said, you can tell from that correction that he is a true econ instructor. I don't know if any social department leadership is going to listen to this, but he's upholding the standard there.
He's also wicked smart. And like you mentioned, we had Chris on to talk about this experience where he had his guys train for the heat, and then lo and behold, they didn't have any heat casualties, whereas guys were, left and right of them falling out. But what it evolved into was a broader conversation about leadership strategies, people management. What I thought was really cool was just the ways in which you can, as a soldier, you can engage with your embedded human performance team, but then also as a human performance team, lessons you can take away in terms of how to engage with your population. Chris, I think for me, firmly falls into this camp of guests that we've had on. And as a disclaimer, we love all of our guests, but occasionally you'll come across a guest where you kind of have a vision in mind for where the conversation will go. And then if you look back at the notes document that Alex and I have anytime we have these conversations, it's full of back and forth between Alex and myself, just being like, holy shit, that was gold. This is awesome. This guy, here's a quote. This dude just keeps hitting home runs. Alex, I think, would credit that to his education at West Point. Fair play. I think Chris is also just a genuinely good dude. So again, the heat conversation is awesome. It's important, but observe just, I think, the broader takeaways that you can gain from the conversation you are about to hear with Chris.
He also provided a ton of extra context. I think he honestly does a pretty good job of covering this in our actual conversation with him. So I'm not going to read the whole thing he provided, but I will offer one thing he didn't cover that he says he could have added to the conversation is that the heat acclimation stuff actually started kind of one major exercise before Defender Pacific. You'll hear all about Defender Pacific in a second. But they did have a company sticks several weeks beforehand, I think 6 weeks beforehand. That was what they initially started doing heat acclimation training for. 95 degree heat index, 30 miles under load in 24 hours with 9 like ESB style lanes and engineer tasks. We didn't really get into the fueling for the heat stuff, but he went into pretty serious depth about he put out that if you didn't eat at least the main meal, one side and the electrolyte drink, or 3 sides if you weren't going to eat the main meal, if you failed to do that, it would be a summarized Article 15, not messing around on eating enough and hitting macronutrient and electrolyte goals to handle the heat. But they did get through that with no heat casualties, and that helped demonstrate that this is working. So they doubled down on it for Defender Pacific. And I think we'll leave it to the rest of the episode to elaborate on how he made those decisions and how they paid off in the exercise.
Enjoy. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with a dumb question. I need to understand what Defender Pacific exercise is. Where is it? What does it look like? What does it entail? Give me the whole spiel.
So as I understand it, it's theater-wide for the entire Indo-PACOM region, and it's designed to sort of be a bit of a show of force, strategic messaging type thing. As I understand it, they do Defender Pacific 1 year, and then they do Defender Europe the next year, and they swap back and forth between going to European theater and Pacific theater. And it's a lot of different operations going on at once. Navy has an operation that's part of it. Air Force does, and Army does, of course, too. And our main one was to demonstrate short forcible entry capabilities with multinational partner forces, with like Indonesian paratroopers and Thai paratroopers. So that was the main objective. Usually only, I think the entire exercise is probably like a month long in its entirety. We just had like a week long snippet of that as the 82nd, as the brigade that I was in at the time.
Nice.
And just to provide a little more context for people listening, what was your role at the time? What was your involvement in the exercise?
Yeah, so I was a sapper company commander at the time, and when we jumped in, I had just the engineer, the light engineer equipment team with me. So like heavy equipment operators designed to do like airfield damage repair. We couldn't do that on that specific exercise, so they were just serving as combat engineers supporting maneuver elements on the ground on the drop zone, doing typical sapper type stuff.
Okay. And then to ease us towards the fitness part of this conversation, what time of year did that happen? And what were the conditions you were jumping into?
Yeah, it was the first week of August that we actually jumped. Yeah, it was hot. And I think at the time, the heat index on the drop zone was about 100 in Indonesia, and we were jumping out of the A pod from Guam, and there was 101 heat index there at the time, if I recall right.
So
And
it cooled off a
about,
little bit as you guys
yeah,
are.
yeah, yeah. And it was like, I think the day of no cloud cover, no precipitation. It was like ideal jump conditions, just extremely hot.
And I don't know, it may have been like exaggerated by the time it hit me, but we kind of have you here to talk about how you prepped for the heat part of that situation. And I kind of want to confirm or deny what I had heard in the first telling of the story, which was that you guys were the only element involved that day that didn't have any heat casualties. Is that accurate? Is that confirmable? Do you know?
That's as far as I know, too. I didn't get the whole roll up. I think there was about, oh man, it was a battalion task force. I want to say around 800 jumpers, about 6 to 7 U.S. units, company size plus. And as I understand it, I was the only one that did not have key casualties. As soon as I was getting off the drop zone, one of my platoon sergeants was actually the DZSO, the guy in charge of like coordinating the jump, making sure it's actually safe to conduct the operation on the drop zone. He showed me a tally of about 45 heat casualties before I had even gotten off the drop zone. So
And
it
and
was
45
hot.
heat casualties is like 5% of the total combat
Yeah,
power
about that.
was a
Yeah.
casualty just from heat.
Yes.
Okay.
Was no one expecting this?
No, it was, yeah, we totally were. It was just, we had to get our, usually it's like for these types of operations, you get your parachute off and you just leave it there, ideally. And then you put like an orange trash bag or somewhere to mark it. That's very obvious for when they come and collect the chutes. In this instance, for some reason, we had to bring our chutes to an assembly area and we had to weave our way through like these paddies in this agricultural area. So what looks like a straight line distance of about 200 meters, you probably had to walk maybe 600. It doesn't sound like much, but when you're carrying your ruck that you jumped in with all your necessary equipment for the mission, plus this 45-pound parachute, people were moving slow, and it was much heavier and much hotter than I think people were ready for.
I don't want to like tell the story for you. I want you to be able to tell it, but it sounds like you foresaw some of that in terms of like we're going to jump into like a pretty hot environment. How far out did you know that was going to happen, and what steps did you take when you knew that was a primary concern?
So I had heard that we might get tapped as part of the engineer unit to support Defender Pacific because we were technically on a red cycle in the 82nd. So we weren't supposed to be part of the IRF1, like the ones who are actually doing, or IRF2, the ones who are doing like these large scale training exercises. But I'd heard around May timeframe that we were expected to perhaps be part of this exercise. and they told us somewhere late July, early August, and I just knew it was going to be ridiculously hot in Fort Bragg at that time. Therefore, it'd probably be equally hot, if not more so, in the South Pacific theater. I was actually doing the heat acclimation protocol in my mind. I had wanted to do it prior to when I had my main company training aligned in the first 2 weeks of June. That was the main reason I wanted to actually start it in May. And then I ended up being able to carry over that heat acclimation protocol for 3 months up until we jumped in August. So it was actually a very beneficial timeline for my sake.
Was this not like, and here's me as a civilian, right? So maybe this is a dumb question. I don't know how these planning operations work, but like this is several months out. And you're like, hey
Yeah.
guys, it's going to be hot as shit. Maybe we should do something about that.
Yeah.
Was this not like shared? Did other people not say, hey, I think you're right? Or like,
I
how did I
I
miss
I
the
don't
boat?
I had a discussion with my battalion commander about potentially doing reverse schedule PT. I had many reasons for doing it. Some of them pretty selfish, perhaps, as a commander, where I just wanted me and my guys to be able to get more sleep. So it was like many birds with one stone: more sleep, be able to work out when it's the hottest part of the day, ideally to heat acclimate prior to us doing company training in June. So I didn't have heat casualties in June during my company internal training. I brought it up to my battalion commander. He seemed very open to the idea, and we started doing reverse schedule PT in May through June and July as well. But yeah, as far as that idea getting disseminated out to the rest of the brigade, I think they wanted to see like how it went first. I was kind of like the pilot, the guinea pig for it.
And was the rest of the unit like on board with that? I mean, the whole reverse cycle PT thing, number one, but then also it's hot outside now while you're PTing. I mean, how did that salesmanship go?
It was kind of mixed depending on the platoons. One of my platoons was all about it. That was like the best idea they had ever heard. um, and the other two kind of saw some constraints in terms of like, well, we'll have somewhat like shorter work day because I didn't have them report until 8:30 a.m. And then we would start PT at 15:30, and then I would still give them a full lunch break. So we had 5.5 hours of working time as opposed to six, what they were used to having. But as opposed to reporting at 6:30, they don't have to report until 8:30. So I was hoping to give them a lot of personal time in the morning, maybe get their kids to school for those that had married soldiers and with kids. Like I was tried to brief it pretty well, and they seemed pretty receptive to the idea, at least willing to try it out within my company.
This is backing up a tiny bit, but correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like this was kind of driven by you recognizing the heat concern. Like nobody came to you and talked about this. Nobody was like, "Hey, planning considerations." This was just you kind of recognizing what what is it about your background that made you realize? Because like the Army talks about heat acclimatization and there's resources out there, but I don't think it's pushed real hard in actual training schedules.
Mhm.
What what made it enough of a priority to you to shape your schedule around it?
Probably personal experience. I love the heat as opposed. I hate the cold, and I'd much prefer to work out in the heat. But I had a lot of experience like doing very strenuous exercise in the heat. I played rugby at West Point in our sevens time frame, which is you take your 15s team of rugby and you just split it in half, but you cover the same size field. And that tournament that we would do every year for sevens would normally happen in June, July type time frame, and it was unbearably hot. And the detriment to my performance as a result of working on the heat, I remembered that quite vividly as a cadet. And I took those lessons in my head when we were going through Ranger school as well. I went in one of the hottest periods in August. And yeah, August, I was in Florida phase. And I remember it being about, I think it was reported about 115 degrees heat index, and we had people heat catting just laying around in the patrol base, not even moving. And they were still not being able to meet the hydration requirements just because it was so hot. So I think it was probably just personal experience from having to do operations or workouts in the heat previously from my past times.
And then at what point did you approach the H2F team to get involved in this?
I would say probably late May. I really wanted to get them involved with nutrition and hydration protocols. So Captain Savannah Gideon, her name was. She was the dietitian and nutrition specialist for Second Brigade at the time, and I think I was able to wrap her into the plan late May or early June before I did the company level sticks operation, just to do like a sweat assessment and get my soldiers understanding like, wow, I did not realize I lost 1, 2, 3 pounds of sweat just from this like workout that I didn't really think I was sweating that much in. I really need to up my water intake before, during, after. That was when I first started to get H2F involved, was late May, early June.
So you had already gotten reverse cycle PT approved, and did you already have like a training protocol in mind for what the acclimatization would look like?
I did, yeah. I wanted to do, so we kind of piggybacked off of training plans that H2F had given us, given some goals that we had from ACFT, like diagnostic tests that each platoon ran through. Depending on how that platoon or squad did, they would have a training block given to them, approved by the PL and myself for whatever they found was wanting from their ACFT diagnostic test. It could be power, it could be high rep strength, they called it, for like muscular endurance, could be building some aerobic base. I started to give direction that I wanted more emphasis on aerobic base building or aerobic conditioning, at least one extra day of that, if that was not already a priority for them. And I wanted them to do that at the hottest part of the day. And I did not care like how bad the workout was. Like I knew their performance was going to suffer, but I did not think that they knew that. So I ran with a lot of the students the first time that they did their first aerobic session outside in reverse cycle. And they were like walking half of it. And they're like, holy crap, like I was not expecting this. And was fully aware their performance would decline. And that is exactly what I wanted to happen. I wanted them to be forced to have to drive these adaptations before they actually had to utilize these energy systems in a hot environment. So that was really the only guidance I gave, was increase the amount of aerobic capacity that you're doing, and then some subtle guidance in terms of like drink 2/3 of your body weight, and preferably water. It could be tea. Energy drinks do not count towards your fluid intake. 2/3 of your body weight in pounds converted to ounces before PT starts, and then or I'm sorry, throughout the entire day, and then 2/3 of that before PT starts in the afternoon. That was really the only hard guidance I gave during this cycle.
I'm curious about like the H2F piece because I mean, obviously working in H2F, you see some of this on a daily basis, but then I also hear about like, I guess the best way to phrase this would be like relational issues sometimes between units and H2F teams. And I can imagine that there's probably a world where somebody like you comes to an embedded team, says, hey, I want you to like train my guys in the heat. I want to do, and like on paper, those look like all the wrong things in terms of like how to train an athlete in the ideal environment. But in your case, it made a lot of sense because this is, I mean, quote unquote, pretty sports specific given what you guys were heading into. So I guess maybe this question is for the H2F teams out there. And in your case, like what did that look like, that dialogue between you and the team to set the stage for that so that you're all on the same page, everybody understands what's going on, and then you step into that training cycle, not only with the training piece, but then like the educational stuff that goes along with it.
I've really only started to engage with A-Tush after about a month of already having done this reverse cycle PT, and I really should have had them involved like a month or 2 months before that, right? So that they could help me build the plan. So I was late to the party in that regard. Once I did get them involved, I made sure that I had them go through like my training plans along with me, the ones that the squad leaders developed and PLs developed. Does this make sense given the goals that I have for one, the company sticks in June, and then to take the gains that we make in aerobic conditioning, heat acclimation, and carry them over into Defender Pacific in August. And I made sure that like the sweat assessments, the nutritional guidance that I was giving out was absolutely sound and right. That was really about it. I probably brought them in a bit too late, but when I did, they made some subtle adjustments like, hey, focus maybe on only increasing your mileage by like this amount. Don't do like a 20% increase in your total mileage every week. Maybe do 10% so you can allow the body to acclimate to the heat first, and then you can build some aerobic capacity after that, something like that. Right. So they really helped me fine tune it. and make sure I wasn't going like way off the reservation from a safety standpoint, which was my main concern.
Mhm.
This is a tough one in the health and fitness world. Like everybody wants to assume that we teach a topic and they're like, oh, that's awesome. I'm going to incorporate that right now. Turns out it's not the case. Like just teaching somebody about something health and fitness related doesn't actually change anything necessarily.
Yeah.
You've mentioned sweat stuff. You also specifically mentioned that your goal with, or part of your goal with reverse cycle was to give the guys a chance for more sleep. There's been lots of debate about whether people
Yes.
take that time and use it for sleep.
Yes.
I'm curious what your experience was in terms of we teach about these topics. Did it actually influence behavior?
Yeah, I would have loved to have tracked it. Unfortunately, I did not see myself as like going in and checking on them while they were sleeping, and like the wee hours of the night was not probably the best use of like monitoring. Yeah, all I could do, and I was pretty clear in my messaging to the PL. I was like, look, I am giving you and your soldiers like this amount of time to get the extra sleep. I know that you're probably not going to use all of it, but all I can do is give you at least the time. You are now free to make the right decisions and the right behaviors if you choose to do so, and I hope you do. At the very least, summertime, maybe it'll help get your circadian rhythm in check, where you can wake up at a very like reasonable, steady hour every single day. Maybe at 7 a.m., get some breakfast, show up to work at 8:30. Yeah, I had no way of like monitoring if they were actually utilizing this additional time as I had hoped they would. Towards the end of my stint as CO, I was working on getting a contract with Whoop to get every single soldier in my company a year's subscription to a Whoop device. And that was going to be the way that I was planning on tracking sleep, training metrics, stress, how they're reacting to different training cycles, that type of stuff. And I was really looking forward to getting that integrated, but we couldn't make the contract go through, unfortunately. So,
Mhm.
As somebody who's been in the military wearables space a little bit, it's harder than it looks.
yeah,
Tough.
Way harder than it looks.
Just a quick shout out. This isn't even a question, just to like add some context. And I think this was Ellie Herdina's team up in Alaska, their H2F program. They have some data indicating that giving people back time at the end of the day does not necessarily change sleep behaviors, but giving people back time at the beginning of the day does seem to, in
hmm
terms of like looking at like an average of a plus 30 minutes sleep average, which sounds small, but is pretty significant when you total that up
yeah,
across a bunch of soldiers. So that's all.
absolutely. I did not expect that anyone in my company, aside from like some of the more salty seasoned platoon sergeant vets, those types of want to wake up at 5:30 every day. So I know that they have a preference for probably sleeping a little bit later if they choose to not go to bed earlier instead, or if they choose to stay up later instead. I can't really control that, unfortunately.
I want to ask about reverse cycle PT, and I know we're kind of bouncing between two different topics here, but like that's a very seductive concept for a lot of people, especially in the H2F space, because it does, like you say, allow for more sleep, morning habits, all these kinds of things. One of the biggest pushbacks that I hear is that if you on your own in your little bubble do that, you miss out on all the other standard events happening during the day, late meetings, whatever. So like
hmm
how did you get around that? What were some other obstacles you dealt with? I just want to hear you riff on reverse cycle PT because I know there's a
Yeah.
lot of people out there that want to try that and don't know how.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was very careful to message to my battalion commander when I was briefing him this idea is I showed him the battalion's battle rhythm and the brigade's battle rhythm, all the meetings that I'm expected to be at, all the reports I'm expected to give at certain times, all the meetings that I'm expected to host as a CO for my PLs. And I overlaid it over a reverse cycle schedule and showed him how I would still meet all those requirements within a day. So it may be the case that instead of me PTing with a particular platoon on like a Tuesday when we would normally do our battalion training meetings, I might have to go to the battalion training meeting and put my XO in place to instead monitor the platoons going through what they're supposed to be doing. Or maybe my first sergeant doesn't come to one of the meetings and instead he's down with the platoons, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It was actually easier than I thought it would be because I could choose to leave my company area and go do what only the CO or the first sergeant of the XO could do. Go to these training meetings, go to these admin meetings, go to these resource working groups. I was able to just not do PT myself with a platoon. I would do it early in the day if I knew that was a problem. And it freed me up to kind of be very flexible in the way that I was able to manage the battalion to company relationship. Everything below company, I had really no conflicts with any type of higher ups interfering with the schedule. There may be like an exception every other week where a PL might have to go brief his, upward or his con up to the BC or to the maneuver battalion commander that we support. But those are few and far between. Yeah, I'm pretty deliberate overlaying of schedules, making sure that the battle rhythms meshed or that I could make them work if I had to.
Were there any cons or like unpredicted stressors that came with that from a leadership position?
Yeah, it was since we were on red cycle, so we were the main unit that was supposed to be tasked to handle all the duties that would allow the other brigades or the other battalions who are supposed to be in their heavy training cycle or supposed to be supporting IRF1, the ones that are supposed to be able to blow out at any moment. So there were a few tasks that I was not able to free up some soldiers for to have 1530 to 1700 available to them. They would instead have to be like one of these taskings like guard duty or something like that. That's pretty strict. So it was, we had a couple of those, but it was nothing that we could not handle by exception. And there was usually a way to be like, okay, it was a bit more decentralized than others might be comfortable with. We might have like a couple squads PTing in the morning on certain days because that entire squad was tasked out for guard duty or for something that they would be forced to miss afternoon PT for. So there was a little bit of that. And I also got some pushback from some of the platoons that they felt like they could not actually get the amount of stuff they were tasked with done in that working day since I shortened their working day by half an hour. They were running into some logistical constraints and some admin constraints where they felt like they could not actually keep up with the workload. But I had other platoons that kept up just fine and loved every minute of it. So,
Would you say that like morale improved? Like did the soldiers would like this change?
yes, from the only pushback I got was from like the ones who was the leadership. Unfortunately, it was like PL platoon sergeant and like squad leaders, But as far as like the actual Joes, they seemed to really enjoy it, especially two of the platoons. They said it was like one of the biggest morale boosting things that they had happen in their unit for a while. They could not believe that they did not have to get up at 5:30 every day. And yeah, they seemed to enjoy it.
So I didn't foresee this being a topic in the conversation, but you mentioned that it was a little more decentralized than some people might be comfortable with. And I find that comment really interesting because there seems to be a difference between how much centralization people expect in like garrison stuff versus how much centralization people expect in like field or deployment or combat stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you described in terms of like some squads doing things at different times from other squads and like independent decision making at that level of leadership sounds kind of like good training to me. Like that sounds like what's gonna happen in the field anyway, and it sounds like something you should be entrusting to people at that level. I know that's not a question, but like
No.
that seems
Yeah.
valuable.
That's exactly how I viewed it too. Like this was such a good opportunity for a commander to like teach training management with like very low stakes and like be incredibly failure tolerant, right? So did require some trust on my behalf. And of course I would verify every now and then. I would spot check. The nice thing is that H2F introduced this Falcon Fit course, which was basically a 2-day intensive program aimed at training team leaders, squad leaders, PLs, whoever, any leadership that'd be in charge of actually running PT. It would take them through all the necessary particulars of how to do it correctly, from program design, exercise physiology, lifting technique, long range PT planning, logistics, recovery, nutrition. They got this huge crash course in a 2-day period. I cycled all of my team leaders and squad leaders through this 2-day training over like a 3-month time span. So I knew once they had like graduated this Falcon Fit course, they had a pretty good understanding of how to do PT management, build out a good program design, hit the goals that they wanted to. Like they were very well empowered with the knowledge that it seems to me was kind of isolated only at like the PO, CO level before H2F came and did these Falcon Fit courses. So I was pretty confident that once they had gone through this, I was pretty comfortable with them being decentralized. They had all the tools that they needed to actually do good PT on their own. Then it just was a problem of verifying that they're doing what they're supposed to do, which is very easy to do.
I want to focus on that for a second because, I mean, I help facilitate courses like that. I think every brigade that has H2F has a course like that. They all call it different things, but I want to pick your brain here because it sounds like you kind of took point in facilitating that. You pushed guys through, you utilized them based on the training they received. One of the things that I think I see and others see is that, well, I guess one of two things. Either one, soldiers get sent to those courses because, like, they're, no offense, but like the shitbags that have nothing else to do, go take the course. That's one thing that I see. The other thing I see is that well-intentioned soldiers go through courses like that. They come back to people like you, and then they either get underutilized, they don't get utilized at all. There's just not
Mm,
like it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And I guess again, this is sort of a question on behalf of maybe like H2F, but like
yeah.
as the person in that leadership position, how did you leverage that skill set that those soldiers came back with? And then how did you sort of put them into the formation to utilize those skills instead of having like First Sergeant Snuffy come in and say we're doing sprints on Tuesday
Yeah.
because that's what he likes doing?
Yeah. Uh, I got to the point where squad leaders owned their entire 3 month training block. I would have, so we actually got much better at training management throughout my tenure as a company commander from like top down initiatives from the CG to the brigade commander to the BC. They were very much about having a deliberate schedule, make it predictable, and that allows your subordinates to plan on your behalf. Essentially, allows them to take control of their time away from the CO and the PL, who doesn't really need to manage their time for them. So the squad leaders owned the training. So when I got a platoon's PT plan, I would verify them and I would make sure that it aligned with their training block and make sure it aligned with the overall company goals and aligned with the maneuver task force that they were supposed to support. And that was about it. I made sure that it had like a good progression. I made sure that I deconflicted the use of like the company gym and the
Mhm.
beaver fit that was assigned to the company. And I made sure that they had like a pretty good plan for warming up, hit all the big lifts or the main event, and then a good cool down. And it got to the point where after about a month of iterating over sending PT plans back because they didn't meet the standard, I got PT plans that I had to make almost no corrections to whatsoever because the platoon leaders were verifying that they were correct before they got to me, and the squad leaders were verifying that a team leader's plan, it was like practice of training management. Of course, the team leader isn't going to be the one in charge of a 3 month training block, but I saw squad leaders start training their team leaders on how to do this stuff because they knew that they had also been to these Falcon Fit courses. So it enabled me to get like almost hands off and put all of the power, since they had all the knowledge, to the squad leaders. And I was simply just verify that they were doing what they're supposed to be doing with my own battle rhythm of getting these PT plans every week and verifying them.
Mhm.
So another question that I didn't expect to come up here. I should have foreseen this one because it has a lot to do with staggering PT times throughout the day. But I think the conversation that I remember the best happened at Fort Bragg specifically, so it's very relevant here. Somebody was making a comment about how the number of soldiers at Fort Bragg, the Army just doesn't have the facilities and equipment for them to do, whether you want to call it resistance training or functional fitness or whatever you want to call it, like training that involves equipment. They don't have the amount of facilities and equipment necessarily for that number of soldiers. And and that's only true if they expect everyone to train at the exact same time and then the facilities to sit empty the other 23 hours of the day. And it seems like staggering PT times, reverse cycle PT, whatever you want to call it, eases that dramatically. So I'm wondering, you mentioned company gyms and beaver fits, and like it seems like leveraging that gets a ton easier when you're doing PT at a time that's not typical of the rest of your battalion, brigade, division, whatever. So I'm just
Yes,
curious how
yes.
that was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would have enough extra equipment organically where I could do 2 platoons of resistance training. Not like every single soldier gets their own bench press type of thing, but they could cycle through it in such a way that it would be not take up too much time and they would get all their soldiers through if we had like 3, 4, 5 benches set up with the beaver fit and the company gym combined. But like you said, the nice thing about reverse cycle PT, there's not that many soldiers in the base gyms. So if a squad had it on their schedule that they're supposed to do resistance training or a strength program or whatever it is for a particular day, I was perfectly fine with that squad going to a base gym and utilizing the equipment that no one else was using at 15:30 during the day, right? It was like we'd go down to the track, normally packed, hard to do like interval runs because you're running into so many other people trying to train on the same track. And there was not a single soul out there at 15:30, and the whole squad had it all to themselves. So that's, yeah, it's a great point. Doing it at different times also frees up all the equipment that is usually pretty scarce and constrained resource wise.
Awesome. Pivoting slightly back to the heat thing, because I know we've been talking mostly about reverse cycle, separate from heat for a while, but I'm curious. So I first heard about what you were doing through your brigade's H2F team because I knew some of them. But I'm wondering, I don't think like the Army at large knows the story of that and the potential lessons learned from it. The Army does have a heat center. It was not something I was really aware of when I was on active duty. I'm wondering if you worked with them at all, used any resources from them, or even like shared the TTPs or lessons learned with them. And I'm gonna say Dave DeGroot's name here. Hopefully he's listening to this episode because I think this is relevant to his work.
No, unfortunately, I didn't. I should have. I should have probably codified what I did and shared it with the force. I had assumed that if it was worth sharing, someone else would have done it on my behalf.
Well, here we are.
Yeah. So here we are.
We're sharing it.
No, I didn't use any of the heat center's resources, unfortunately. I used FM 7-22, which was pretty new at the time, as like a foundational model, and it even mentions reverse cycle in FM 7-22. So that was like my gotcha to my battalion commander, which he didn't challenge me on it, but he's like, look, it's in doctrine, I can do this, right? But no, I didn't use any of those resources, unfortunately. And I did not, outside of spreading the sort of TTPs or like the experience of what I had in Defender Pacific with the H2F team, the brigade H2F team, I didn't really push it beyond that. I probably should have.
Okay, well, that's what the purpose of the podcast is. We'll see. We'll see if Dave responds to this. I'll probably send him a note or something. We've had him on the podcast a couple times.
No, don't send him a note. This is a challenge to Dave. Dave, if you're listening,
that's fair. We'll test whether he still listens to the podcast. So I'm curious about one thing. I went back and I looked at the messages we exchanged as we led up to planning this, and one thing was interesting and stood out to me. And you mentioned that in the tents, presumably in Guam, leading up to the jump, there was air conditioning in the tents.
Yeah.
And I'll set this up a little bit because I'm curious about like the why of that and how it impacted other units. But it also feels very similar to the reason the Army typically does PT early in the morning is to avoid heat injuries during PT. But by avoiding exposure to the heat and the risk associated with it so thoroughly during all of our training, it sets people up for being unprepared for it and not acclimatized to it when they are inevitably forced to operate in it.
Yes.
I'm sure you were thinking along the same lines as you planned this all out, but I'm curious both from like the planning standpoint and the air conditioned tents before your tropical operation. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in Guam at the aerial port of debarkation, like the airport we would fly out of to actually execute the jump. And we were living in essentially like a tent city. And I believe, as I'm sure that you've come across this problem before, the AC was contracted. They were actually, if I recall right, legally not allowed to turn it off, or it would like void the contract or something like that. I had the same issue in Defender Europe when we were doing jumps out of Romania. It was freezing and absolutely like uncomfortably cold in the tents at night, such that you could hardly sleep. So when I got to Guam, found out that there's AC in the tents, I'm like, well, that kind of throws a wrench in the plans of heat acclimation. Luckily, it was only 5 days, and every other leader at Guam recognized this as an issue. Like, look, it's 5 days. Stay out of the tents unless you're sleeping at night. Get into the heat as much as you possibly can. We still did BT outside during that time, those 5 days in Guam. And there was a lot of like recreational sports being played, like ultimate frisbee, soccer with multinational force. And the only reason why they would hang out in the tents was to sleep. And we made that pretty clear. It's from brigade down, like stay out of the AC as much as you possibly can to maintain any adaptations if you have them by now, or at least not get too comfortable in the cold for those that don't have those adaptations quite yet.
So, kind of circling all the way back to the beginning, 45 heat casualties out of like 800-ish odd jumpers. You were very intentional about this whole train up. I mean, the battalion commander, it was a thing, right? It wasn't just, you didn't stumble into this. It was very intentional. Was there an after action, not like a gotcha moment, but maybe like an I told you so, like a hey, check this out? Like, was there anything on the back end of this where they're like, holy shit, what were those guys doing? None of their guys fell out. Like, what did the after effects look like?
It was mainly H2F reaching out to me once they had heard that we had had no heat catches. Like, what was your protocol? And Savannah Gideon and some of the other ones that were involved in just spot checking the train up and making sure it was copacetic. They reached out to me, got some lessons learned, and that's kind of where it stopped. We were a pretty small unit composite of the entire battalion task force. I was only able to take about, I think, 28 soldiers with me because of where this was in the middle of trying to get the entire force vaccinated. So
Hmm.
I only took one platoon who everyone was vaccinated within, and I was able to deploy with that force. But I think it's probably because we were such a small unit relative to the entire battalion task force, and we didn't have that significant of a role on the actual drop zone itself. So that was probably the reason why I would assume it was not really captured or codified. It was much more about training with multinational partners, building up this strategic messaging type thing. So that was more of the emphasis.
That brings me to an important point. I'm hoping as people have been listening to this conversation that maybe we've convinced a few of them that this is something interesting and worth trying. So from a very practical standpoint, like from your vantage point as a company commander, also looking at the PT schedules that you were overseeing and approving, like what did the protocol look like? What is the guidance you put out? What kind of training were people doing? How much of it? I'm kind of looking for the X's and O's for like on behalf of listeners. Like, hey, I'm a squad leader, platoon leader, first sergeant, company commander, whoever. I want to know how to execute what he did so I can get the results that he got. What would
Mm-hmm.
you tell them?
I would say treat it as if it's a unit training plan and be very deliberate about how it's resourced and planned and coordinated. Like it's not something that should be passed over initially. Imagine it's like a demolition range or a company live fire that you're planning, and put that amount of mindset and effort into planning it and codifying it in the initial stages. Prove to your subordinates that you are taking this seriously, and that requires a bit of deliberate planning aligned against it. And if you bear that cost in the front end, maybe like a month into doing this, it should get the message down to the subordinates that, okay, I need to put more time and effort into doing this, and it'll relieve the duty from the commander from having to put all that time and effort into it themselves. It's just utilize the 8-step training model for PT2 would be the only thing I would say. Treat it as if it's its own training management plan. That's requires resourcing and all that.
I'm going to throw out a talking point that I've used in random op-eds or whatever before. I don't know if I've brought it to the podcast before, but PT can feel like an afterthought because it's like a quick thing you do each day. If you add up the number of hours spent doing PT over the course of a training cycle, it's almost identical to the number of hours spent in training in a JRTC or NTC rotation.
Mm-hmm.
They are nearly identical. And
Yeah.
if you think about what goes into a JRTC or NTC rotation, you have leader planning conferences, you have like trips to go out and survey it. Like a tremendous amount of leader time and energy goes into those events. Drew and I chatting about this, but like all you really just said there was that physical training is training. Treat
Yes.
it that way.
Yes.
And that seems fairly straightforward, but apparently surprising to some people sometimes.
Yeah. And the nice thing is it's easy to treat it like training because it's protected time that you're getting every single day. No unit that I've come across in the Army is like, hey, we only PT some days and it's unpredictable when we do choose to PT. Like, exactly when it's scheduled every single day. That gives you an incredible amount of leniency that you have in putting the onus on squad leaders or team leaders, people who are not familiar with actually doing deliberate training management, and put it on them to start doing it for something that is relatively low cost and low stakes, in my view.
Why is that? Like, why is the Army so weird about PT? That's like a huge question. I get that, but I just can't. I just get my wires crossed thinking about that. Like because you're right. I mean, Alex and I obviously we have a whole podcast built on this concept, and you have all these training doctrines, and the military loves working out, and you have to do it every day. But like, for lack of a better phrase, it's such a clusterfuck. And then you come across people like you who are very intentional. It makes a lot of sense. You get great results. Like, what's going on? Like, what are we missing?
I don't know. I think probably hurdle one would be that's just like not sexy, right? When you think of training, you think of doing like a combined arms live fire where you're breaching and you got maneuver units coordinating on objective and you got close air support, you got fires being directed like that. All that stuff is the classic things that you see when you think of be all you can be type army, right? It's not that fun to have to manage someone who is not good at PT, right? If you try to focus on raising the ceiling instead of the floor, I think that's where a lot of effort gets wasted. Like you want to focus on the PT studs, right? Because those are the type of people you want all the other soldiers to look like. But I think a lot more time and energy should be spent on raising the floor, the ones who are not good at it. And that's just, I mean, it's not enjoyable for me when I do that. The like ongoing saying is you spend 90% of your time with 10% of your force because you're only dealing with the ones who are not like adapting to like the rest of your ones, or you're always giving out Article 15s to the ones that are misbehaving, whatever the case is, right? It's not fun to deal with the ones who need the help. Unfortunately, you kind of just want to put it on the squad leader or team leader, or you want to outsource it to H2F and just put them into reconditioning programs
Hmm.
when they just and make it not your problem. It's not fun to deal with the ones who are not up to snuff or the ones who are below average. But I think that's where most of the energy needs to be spent,
Hmm.
uh, unfortunately.
I want to underline what he said there. And he says, unfortunately, but I think like a small shift in perspective, and I've thought about this a lot. Like trainers like to train elite performers, but you can only make small improvements with elite performers. They're already most of
Mm,
the way there. If you focus on the people who need it more, you can make a massive difference in not just their performance as a service member, but like their quality of life forever, right? Like you add 5 or 10 points to a 20 something year old guy's VO2 max,
mhm.
you just bought him like a decade of quality life on the back end as he ages, like long after the army. Like
Yeah,
that's a huge thing to do for a person. It's not something they'll know to thank you for when it comes, but like that's absolutely massive. And I like what he said about raising the floor, not pushing the ceiling, because that's what this is all really about. That's where the biggest return on investment comes from. Like why do programs like H2F exist? It's not nobody cares how many 600s there are on these. Like nobody at the Pentagon is counting the number of 600s, but people at the Pentagon are tracking time lost due to injury, profiles over
mm,
30 days, profiles over 90 days, cases of type 2 diabetes. Like I see fatty liver disease in service members in their 20s and stuff. Like
Jesus.
that's the stuff we genuinely need to worry about. And I love that we drew that out here because that's absolutely the thing. And in the 82nd in particular, but the whole army sucks at this. I think junior leaders think it's their job to beat someone over the head with the standard, like 12-mile ruck, 3 hours, five
Mm.
mile run, 40 minutes. Like just hammer people with that and then they like fail it. And then you tell them they're a bad soldier and then they feel bad and you do it again and they fail it. And you tell them they're a bad soldier. It's about meeting them where they are and like charting a path to where they need to be. And
Absolutely.
I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
on a soapbox now, but
No, you're
that's
you're
the
totally
thing.
right. That's really like a leadership challenge. It's very easy to lead people who are like self-motivated and they get it. They know the standard. They can achieve it themselves. They're tracking, right? That's easy to lead those people. It doesn't require a good leader to do it. It does require a good leader to empathize, like you said, meet someone where they're at and build something that you're like, Jesus, I can't believe we have to take it from like a 20-minute pace on a ruck. There's no way. If that's where they're at, you have to be willing to accommodate that and build them up. And the nice thing is like you exactly reframed it correctly. I said, unfortunately, we want to focus on like the below average people, but that's where all the newbie gains could be made too. You see, like you said, huge return on investment as you get more and more fit, diminishing margin returns, same amount of time and effort put into energy and expenditure and all that. You don't get that with people who are already unfit. You see huge jumps in performance and capacity like within a month, which is probably pretty rewarding as a leader to see if you're taking your time training them correctly.
One of the things you mentioned in kind of your plan and your lead up was it sounded like a really strong integration between you, your guys, the H2F team. I mean, you've still got NCOs leading or taking charge when it comes to PT, but H2F is playing a role in that. And so, to give sort of some context from where I'm coming from, another thing we hear often across this whole embedded human performance enterprise is like challenges between civilians coming in, providing subject matter expertise on physical training, pushback on the military side because PT is a quote unquote leadership development tool for NCOs. Coaches shouldn't coach. There should be consultation, like all of this different stuff. And so just, I want to turn it over to you to speak to what that relationship and integration looked like on like a granular level so that
Mhm.
everybody was better for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we're the biggest gains from using H2F integrated into, like you said, like the military physical training. It is a little bit different. Like they always try to frame it as like a tactical athlete rather than just like a normal sports athlete, right? Uh, I think acknowledging the fact that like there are people who just have poor lifting technique, and that's going to be poor if they're if they're an expert, and there needs to be like a leveling of knowledge, right? Like some flattening of expertise. I am totally fine with this. I don't care who it is coming from. If they know the correct technique to do a lift, that is part of the program design that my guys have in their 3 month training block, whatever it is, I absolutely want to utilize them. I don't care where the right answer is coming from. If instead they're saying something like, you need to make sure that you're hydrating within 30 minutes of jumping out of the plane, it's like, okay, well, like we can't eat or drink except for water, like in the parachutes, and we've got like, jump master commands we have to give at a certain time. So like it's very easy to like stay in each other's lane and be respectful of each other's areas of expertise while still being able to use each other in a bit of a synergy, like relying on these strength coaches, relying on the dietitians for gaps in knowledge and expertise. I don't really view that as something that should be like a competing for my
Mm,
soldiers' attention. It absolutely should be able to reinforce one another.
sure.
That's one of the largest stumbling blocks for H2F in general, especially as you deal with brigade command teams, division command teams, corps command teams, is that like that perception. So we
Mm.
definitely appreciate it. We are getting close to the hour marks. We have like some less tied to the main theme questions, but you used the phrase diminishing marginal returns there for a second, and you let some of your econ show.
It's a econ guy.
So I'll ask you a quick econ question because you did send me a quick message after the Dr. Cutler episode where we talked about incentives around health and fitness, and you've got a pretty unique perspective, right? You've got clearly a personal passion for human performance. You've got experience being a commander. You've done graduate school in econ, teaching at the college level. I'm curious, and this can tie to H2F. This can be about the Army, or you can go whatever direction you want. But how do you think we could better align incentives for health and performance?
Oof.
No pressure.
Drew's is your annual physical should include some sort of fitness test, and you should get a tax break
I think you should
based
have a
on your
tax
Yeah,
performance.
break based
absolutely.
on your
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great one. I think, oh man, hope I don't speak out of line. I don't think I will, but
We don't have
I think
lines here. There's no
there's,
lines.
I think there's a fundamental misalignment between it's a bit of a principal agent problem where the Army gets essentially free use, not, and I won't want to use the improper term, but to use and abuse their service members, like utilizing exactly what they signed up for, but they don't really bear the cost of utilizing them or overutilizing them. The cost is borne by the VA. What if instead we wrapped it all into the same budget? So you're forced to internalize the cost of overutilizing your soldiers, or making them do PT when they're technically on profile, or shortening the reconditioning protocol because you need them deployable to make your numbers, right? If you actually truly bore the cost of all those annuities that are paid off in VA disabilities, if that has to come out of your operational budget or your personnel budget that is only aligned to the DoD, it may make brigade commanding generals think twice before, no, we need 95% of our people at JRTC. Okay, well, if you want to bring this person who is technically like broke, they should actually be recovering and doing reconditioning PT instead of marching around the field. Perhaps forcing them to bear the cost of those decisions on a lifetime discounted cash flow of all those annuities from VA disability benefits may help to internalize that cost and get them to think about not breaking their soldiers, but like ensuring that they are some like have some type of resilience, some type of longevity associated with their performance in their service, you know?
Annuities, lifetime discounted cash
You're
flow,
blowing
principal
people's
agent
minds right now.
problem. Man, killing it. I will say, I think you are 100% target. I agree with you completely. I think I'll share like a brief story of seeing a microcosm of this, because what you're talking about is at the root of why H2F had to be established at the Army level. I was at Fort Carson when the tactical athlete program, it went through a few different names, so people might know it as like the Iron Horse Performance Optimization Program or a couple other things. But it was a precursor to H2F. It involved strength and conditioning coaches, athletic. I think they had one or two athletic trainers. I forget. There was definitely a physical therapist involved. And the problem was it was funded through end of fiscal year discretionary funds.
Mm,
And so the cost of those people came out of the commander's budget.
mm,
And they were able to demonstrate pretty conclusively, you can find it in like posted newspapers from that era, that they saved dramatically more money than they cost in terms of prevented injuries, fewer people going to medical appointments, fewer lost duty days, all
sure.
these things. But those savings don't put money in the commander's budget. Those savings are from somebody else's pot of money. So it comes back to that principal agent problem. And so what happens is you get to a different year, it doesn't matter that it's a net savings.
Hmm.
Commander only sees the cost, not the benefit. Program's gone.
Yeah, of course.
And I think a little bit of that is what we're seeing right now. We're in the time warp effect here, but Drew and I recorded an episode about 2 hours ago with the Tradox Sergeant Major talking about changes to the now Army fitness test and things going on with H2F. But the Army keeps celebrating the data that H2F is producing in terms of reduction in injuries, reduction in suicides. All sorts of good data is coming out suggesting that it pays for itself. But it only pays for itself if the savings
Yeah.
create money back into the same
Uh,
budget as the expenditures, and we're still not there yet. And so that's seeing cuts to H2F at the same time as we're seeing victories
yeah.
celebrated.
If you're somehow able to carry over those savings into the next fiscal year, that'd be a nice incentive,
Right?
right? But then you have a separate principal agent problem of is a current commander going to
Hmm.
want to do things that are going to benefit the next commander? Like I assume that everyone is pretty much a good actor, right? I have no doubt that at that level, people would want to benefit and get the next guy's savings, free up some money for the next guy to use. But that might be one way to fix it. And I know allocating budgets and discretionary spending, all of that is. I'm definitely not an expert in the budgeting process for the Army, so I know it's probably very hard to do.
This is a weird question, but like, do economic principles factor into like the Army decision-making process or the Army structure at all? I mean, you've clearly got an eye for that. Obviously, you teach it as well, and you're in the military. Like, this all makes a ton of sense when the three of us sit here and say it. I know we're talking big Army movement, but like, do economics factor into this big people management organization whatsoever?
Yes, I used some aspect of economic thinking every single day in the military. And I think there's a misconception of like economics. People immediately think like, balance sheets and budgets and cash flows and that type of stuff. That's more like the finance aspect of economics. Economics is the fact that I think what Thomas Sowell said in his book, there's no solutions, only trade-offs, right? There's always some type of opportunity cost. You're either competing against using this specific person for this specific mission. Well, now he is not free to do this other mission, the next best mission, or time is always an enemy. So any amount of time that I have my soldiers doing something now is time that they don't spend doing something else. You like to think of soldiers as like free labor because you don't actually bear the cost of utilizing them. Again, that principal agent problem, sort of from the taxpayer's perspective. But it's really at the cost of what else could you be doing with your soldiers' time that may be more beneficial for their unit, for themselves, for the hire's mission, whatever the cost, the incentive might be. Yeah, we actually have in the econ department here some economic leader principles, and they very nicely spell out how thinking like an economist would call it, considering opportunity cost, knowing that there's trade-offs. There's always going to be some type of a constraint you're butting up against. You need to properly align incentives. Everyone is good at something. There's this comparative advantage to organizing activity. and ensuring that the person who is doing something is not necessarily the one who is best at it, but the one who has to give up the least amount of stuff to do that activity. Yes. In short, yes, it absolutely applies.
All right. Hardest question you've gotten so far. Rugby guy. I used to live in Scotland. Rugby is my favorite sport. I've made the case over and over again. Rugby players are the fittest athletes in the world. I want to hear your take. Is anyone fitter than a rugby athlete?
I guess fit by what standard?
Correct answer to the question.
Touche. It's a great, okay, maybe I'll rephrase it this way. The argument typically comes down to NFL versus rugby. I make the case rugby because here you've got basically lineman-sized dudes, maybe not that big, but like with soccer levels of endurance. So perhaps the answer to your question is the ability to move for long distances, generate a lot of force, tackling, hand-eye coordination, ball movement, etc. Would you say you're one of the fittest athletes in the world?
Myself, no, I wouldn't. Nice trap there. Yeah. I guess from like a hybrid athlete type perspective, I would say they're pretty close. And especially when you think of like 15s rugby, but sevens rugby. I still to this day have never been more exhausted than like that 6.5 minute mark right before the half, and I have to make another tackle, and I just did a sprint across the entire field. Like I've never been more exhausted in my entire life than in the middle of a sevens game.
Sevens is insane. If you guys didn't watch sevens rugby in the Olympics, go back and hit the reruns.
I'll say, as a guy who didn't spend any time in Europe or around rugby, I had only watched sevens until recently. I saw a little bit of 15s. That looks like absolute madness. Like, hey, like just too many people, too much going on, can't handle it. Yeah. Sevens is
much
like I can
manageable.
Follow sevens. I know what's going on. But
absolutely. Yeah.
All right, we'll hit you with one more, then let you go, because I'm very curious as to your answer on this. And it's one you may have heard us ask folks before, and it's a two-parter. Something you have changed your mind on and something you've doubled down on. And this does not have to be specific to the heat acclimatization conversation. It can be about just structure PT in general, leadership concepts, whatever you feel excited by, but something you've changed your mind on throughout your career, and then something you've doubled down on.
I think something I've changed my mind on is I'm trying to conceptualize it into words. I think sometimes faith and ability actually starts from a leader. I had always considered that if someone is capable of doing something, and this is from my own bias, right? Because this is how I grew up. I was like, if I'm capable of doing something, or I think I'm capable, I will get to that point. Sometimes people don't have that type of upbringing where they have no confidence whatsoever in their abilities. Occasionally, it's incumbent upon the leader to show them what they are capable of. That was a huge hurdle I had to overcome as a commander, where there are people who are like, no, I don't know if I'll hack it to sapper school. No, I'm not even going to try out for ranger. Like, there's no way I could do my bro. Like, you got the mindset. I promise. If you take this seriously, like, I have faith that you will be able to do it, even though you don't. I had not had to come to grips with that. I'd always assumed there was some type of agency and autonomy involved in motivation and achieving goals. And sometimes that's just not true. Something I've doubled down on, perhaps the best like mental model I've had in dealing with organizations, is that no one wakes up deliberately trying to ruin your day. There was always this contention between staff and line companies, right? And it always led to conflicts that were completely unnecessary. I saw a lot of relationships get ruined because, one, they assumed that they would never meet that person again. Another thing I've doubled down on: never, ever, ever burn a bridge. Every time I've wanted to do so, I have run into that person again. It has not failed yet. Like 15 separate times this has happened. I think just recognizing the fact that like people aren't deliberately trying to sabotage what it is that you're trying to achieve. If you can get to some type of win-win, avoid zero-sum games at all costs, I think that is probably the best way to get what you want from an organization and get the organization to get what it wants out of you, for the most part.
I'm just like the fact you just had those like off the cuff was brilliant. World-class answer.
Thank you.
No, but seriously, I know, we reached out about the heat I keep screwing that word up. Acclimatization process. We talked about reverse cycle PT. We've kind of danced all over, and this has been like an awesome conversation. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
We do sometimes on this podcast seek out like high profile leaders, and like sometimes people DM me and are like, you should have Jocko on your podcast, or like you should have insert famous person with a huge platform already in this space. And I don't think we're seeking to platform people who already have massive platforms, because it's easy enough to hear what those people have to say. But we do sometimes have a tendency to go after like big name leaders, and those are fine. Those are good. We love those episodes. They provide quality perspective. We get to dive into an issue they're not talking about a whole lot. But I think we have found, and I know I haven't checked this in a while, but certainly like the two most popular episodes in like their respective year were Emma Paulus and Tyler Fillion. Shout out to both of them. We've stayed in touch. And they were not necessarily like big name folks. Their names had been mentioned to us a couple times by people, but like they were not on our like hit list of target guests. It did take a while to get Christian booked, because like as he mentioned in there, it's been a few years since this happened. But it was only because like conversations had happened to come up when I was doing H2F related things about the success they'd had with heat injury prevention. It was a cool story. It was on my whiteboard when I worked at H2F headquarters of like, what happened here? We need to capture that. But I think those kind of conversations where you find the people that are just like head down, doing the thing, kicking ass at it, not necessarily known quantities to wider audiences, that's where some of our best value seems to come from. And I feel like that just happened right here.
Well, I mean, I think there's, I'll throw out a call to action for people, because to your point, like we've talked to folks at every single level, and I know we've asked like brigade commanders what they think about things like reverse cycle PT, and they'll kind of give you the overall concept, and it's great. But like to hear from somebody like Christian who actually did it at his level and what that meant for his squads and his platoons, like there's a shit ton of value there, I think, for people who listen to this. And so my call to action would be for the embedded teams out there, or for just anybody listening out there. Obviously, rule number one of the podcast is if you ask to come on, you can't, but it's very easy to have somebody else email recommending you. I'm saying that somewhat jokingly. Like if you guys have stories like what you just heard with Christian, lessons learned, things you think might be valuable, like use us as a platform to help get that stuff out. Because on the one hand, like you and I love sitting here talking to people in the Pentagon about big policy type stuff. But I think on the other hand, a lot of that after action lessons learned from like the lower levels doesn't really get platformed as frequently as it should. And or when it does, it gets filtered through the standard Army practices and just becomes super dry. So yeah, I mean, like you said, we brought Christian on to talk about what we thought was going to be one thing. We ended up going in all different directions, and more often than not, that ends up being the best episode.
Any thoughts on the actual episodes? What we're supposed to do in these post-episode recordings? We're just like hyping him right now. It's crazy.
Just hyping him up. I think the part I loved the most, and I mentioned this, I know people wouldn't have heard it because it was after recording, but just kind of doubled back on it with Christian, was like some really solid nuggets in there about the interplay between H2F teams, or just embedded teams in general, and the units that they work with. We hear over and over again how challenging that can be, how contentious that can be in some situations, and just how straight up dysfunctional it can be in other situations. And so I think the way that he was able to look forward into the training plan, see an event coming up, recognize that there was going to be that heat element, structure their training to focus on that, and then integrate the H2F team, the subject matter experts that he had available to him. I mean, that's like exactly what you would want it to look like everywhere. But for some reason, it just doesn't. So it was cool to hear him speak to that.
Yeah, I will step slightly away from the heat, because I think the heat thing is awesome. We covered it. We answered it. There's useful TTPs hot, there.
Yeah, it's
yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Drew loves a good pun. But I think bigger picture, if we want the Army to invest in embedded staff, if we want the Army to invest in nice facilities, if we want the Army to invest in equipment and tools and whatever the stuff, like all the things we like for human performance purposes, it's hard to get investment in those if they are currently underutilized. And we're never going to maximally utilize them if we're stuck on only using them from 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's just not going to get her done. If they sit around the rest of the day, maybe helping people with specific injuries who have appointments, or maybe helping certain special populations who have separately scheduled things, that's just not going to get it done. And I have seen units pull it off where a unit comes in at 6, and a different unit comes in at 7, and a different unit comes in at 8, and a different unit comes in at 9, and a different unit comes in at 10. And PT is scheduled to maximally utilize the resources available throughout the day. And that doesn't have to be every day, but just staggering the utilization of the resources so somebody's taking advantage of it more often than 1 to 2 hours per day is a necessary precondition to get the most out of these programs. I know it's hard. I know it goes against the culture, but it has to happen if we're going to get the most out of them.
Yeah, I think cracking the nut on the path dependency that is Army physical training is going to be like a huge, I mean, that's almost like a hidden gem in terms of just taking the embedded performance model to the next level. Because to your point, like, I think we've probably maxed out our ability to train a certain number of soldiers between the hours of 6:30 and 8. Like, I think we kind of all know what that looks like. The next step is, okay, how do we change that model? How do we, and I don't know at the end, I mean, that's like an ongoing thing. It gets me excited to think about what that could look like.
And it turns out heat adaptation is a very tactically relevant reason to do that.
So is more sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, we could go on and on. Do you have any other thoughts?
I think that's it. We'll come back to this. I already have some stuff in the works about altitude training versus heat training.
Boom.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, team, we will see you next week. Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in-depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.